Welcoming into the Informer studio, the member for Warrandyte, Ryan Smith. Welcome.
Thank you.
An opportunity to talk to someone in the opposition we haven't had a chance to chat to. What do you make of these current unprecedented times everyone keeps telling us about?
Well, there's no doubt they're exactly that. They are unprecedented, and the impacts of the coronavirus and the pandemic and the subsequent government-imposed restrictions are affecting every single Victorian. It's different to other crises we've had in Victoria. We've had floods, we've had fires, who have affected many Victorians, but not all. This has the unprecedented characteristic of affecting every single Victorian, whether they have the coronavirus, whether they have family or friends that have it, or indeed they're simply just stuck at home day after day after day, not able to work, not able to exercise, not able to go to schools. It's an enormous situation.
What are your constituents in Warrandyte telling you? As the member for Warrandyte, what are you hearing on the street?
Well, look, on the ground...
Concerns?
Yeah, there's been, overwhelmingly, is the frustration and the confusion. The restrictions and the rules seem to change all the time. Just last night we had a new reinterpretation of the exercise rule, where you could travel as long as it was within 5 kilometres of your home. You could drive if you wanted to go somewhere specific to exercise. Overnight, that's been reinterpreted. You cannot drive to an exercise point anymore. So I've had already emails come in this morning saying, you know, what's this all about? Why is this happening? So from March, when the Premier decided to deviate from National Cabinet decisions, from March through to now, we've had nothing but confusion, anger, frustration from people who just don't understand the lack of common sense. And you know, George, people want to get through this. People actually want to do the right thing, but they just seem to be hamstrung at every turn.
Ryan, we saw that in the early compliance figures. Everyone understood that we all had to abide by a number of restrictions and we would get through this. That was the promise, or indeed that was the expectation. Something happened. What happened? The second wave.
Well, the feedback that I got from my constituents, and I guess we're seeing more broadly, is the Black Lives Matter protest did change people's views. And in fact, I was with friends, a small gathering on that very day. And when photos of that protest came out, just my friends, and I'm sure it was replicated in households right across the state, just said, why am I doing this if that's allowed? So there was a
it's the real optics that you battle with, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether you have transmission, whether you have contagion, that's by the by. That's another element of the story. But the real optics of actually seeing people defying what you've been instructed not to do must be numbing.
And contrast the two, New South Wales and Victoria. The protest in New South Wales, the government tried to put a court order in to stop it and said, you will be fined. The Chief Commissioner said, you will be fined. In Victoria, the Police Minister and the Premier said, you won't be fined. Put aside for the moment, no government official should be telling police who they can and can't fine. Let's just put that aside for a moment. But the optics, you're exactly right, George, was there, that this was permitted, but what you wanted to do in your own household or with your own friends, it wasn't permitted.
Now, speaking of what's permitted and what's not permitted, you've been in government now, you've been through a number of administrations. I think 2006, first became member for Warrandyte.
Yep.
So you've been in the cabinet with Ted Baillieu, you've been in the cabinet with Napthine. You understand what the role of government entails, you understand the responsibilities of government, and you also now understand the opposition standpoint. If we are going through unprecedented times, how in heaven's name has the opposition been left out of everything?
Well, it's confusing.
If it's an emergency,
yeah, it's frustrating.
If we're supposed to be working together, what the hell's going on?
It's beyond an emergency. The Premier's declared it a state of disaster. It's the most extreme level we could get to. When we were in government back in 2010, we moved into 2011, we had floods. In 2014, we had some major fires, I think over 900 fires on the 9th of February 2014. And I know it well because my own electorate was threatened during those fires. There has always been whether it's an unwritten rule or a precedent or just basic decency, that the government of the day keeps the opposition informed. Even as recently as the fires we had through Gippsland earlier this year, the Minister for Emergency Services kept our Shadow Minister informed. There's always briefings, there's always an understanding that because Victorians are affected directly, that you put politics aside.
It's more than convention, isn't it?
Of course it is. Of course it is.
We're in this together.
It's an expectation, and you're exactly right. Those words are ringing hollow now, because since March, getting answers from either the Premier's office or the Health Minister's office has been nigh on impossible. And I'm sure Victorians are feeling the same way, because we're getting, and my colleague, the Shadow Minister, Georgie Crozier, is getting enormous amounts of queries because people just aren't getting them from the government. The government's not talking to us. In fact, the Premier recently said that whatever the opposition is calling for is of no consequence to me. You know, it's not just not briefing us, it's actively saying he's not going to involve us.
That to me just illustrates yet another dimension that no one has touched on, and that is he is denying more than, we're talking about percentage now, it'd be more than 45% of the populace, a voice, an opportunity to be in the discussion. And if we clamour, we hear these voices, there's this noise in the background, we're in this together. The truth of the matter is we ain't.
No, we're not.
And I'm reminded by a psychologist who we did an interview with recently. She said, yes, we are in a boat, but we're all in a different boat.
Yeah,
and depending on our social demographic, depending on our socioeconomic setup and our makeup, we're either in a dinghy, a leaking one, or in a 200-foot launch with all the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
So when the Premier starts discounting a substantial part of the populace, a substantial part of Victoria, what does that say?
Well, it's just part of the autocratic makeup that is Daniel Andrews. He likes control and command. He likes to keep everything centralised. He likes to be in charge of everything. It's part of the reason, George, why he does these press conferences every day. It's so he can control the narrative. The day he steps away from it is the day that someone else determines what's being said.
That's extraordinary. We're also getting that barking from Michael O'Brien, and I understand his frustrations, but there's got to be more than that, hasn't it?
Well, I think we need to start talking about what's next. And if the Premier wants to talk about numbers, and the numbers that he's talking about are people, but let's talk about some other numbers. Let's talk about the numbers of businesses that are shut. Let's talk about the 400,000 sole traders who have been told they can't put food on the table. Let's talk about the incidences of teenage suicide that seem to be spiking anecdotally. Let's talk about the depression people are going through. I mean, they're real numbers. They're the numbers that convey the real impacts or the extended impacts of the coronavirus. These are numbers that are going to these are people, I should say, who are going to be the victims of coronavirus, not directly, but through the government-imposed restrictions. And the fact that the Premier is not talking about these things frightens me, because it makes me think he's not thinking about them. And they are impacts that we're going to have to face and deal with for months, probably years. These businesses won't get back on their feet. There's kids who have missed out a year of learning. And I just think about my own children, well supported, well loved, no community sport, no school interaction. It's affecting them, and it's probably affecting kids all over Australia.
Let's talk some more about that in part 2 of our interview.
Thank you.